A dying millionaire refused all treatment until a compassionate doctor risked her career to save him and touched his soul. The ER was too bright with pale ceiling tiles humming beneath fluorescent lights. Monitors beeped in a measured rhythm, and somewhere down the corridor a child cried while a nurse's heels clicked briskly against the linoleum. But inside room 14, the air hung heavy with silence and the pervasive smell of antiseptic. Jasper Whitmore stirred on the gurney, his eyes fluttering open like the reluctant start of an old machine. His first breath came shallow, pulled tight through aching ribs. For a moment, all he saw was light, then pain dull and thick, blooming behind his eyes. He blinked again, taking in the white walls, the IV lines, and the oxygen monitor clipped to his finger. His body tensed with a sudden refusal. "Mr. Whitmore," a nurse said, moving quickly toward him. "Please don't sit up yet. Your vitals are unstable." Jasper ignored her instead, clawing at the IV line in his arm and yanking it free. Blood welled up at the insertion site as he declared firmly, "I'm leaving." The nurse pleaded, "Sir, your liver and lungs are both severely compromised. You collapsed from exhaustion and your labs show significant organ strain. Your O2 levels are dropping critically." Jasper cut her off, his voice firm and unyielding. "I said I'm leaving." The nurse flinched. Jasper stood though his knees trembled beneath the weight of his own defiance and reached for the coat draped over the chair. "You can't walk out like this," she said, her voice straining toward calm. "There are protocols that must be followed." "I don't want treatment," Jasper growled. "No IVs, no fluids, no doctors with their hollow optimism." The nurse tried again, "But your condition is critical." He spun toward her, cutting her off. "I trusted you people once, and my wife died for it." The words cracked the air like lightning, and the nurse froze. Before she could answer, another voice, not loud but centered and composed, cut through the tension. "Mr. Whitmore," the voice stated, drawing his attention. Jasper turned to see a woman in a white coat standing in the doorway, mid-30s, perhaps younger. Her blonde hair was pulled back neatly with a few soft strands framing a face that looked more resolute than kind, more knowing than curious. She stepped inside. "I am Dr. Eliana Hale," she said calmly. "Oncology." Jasper exhaled a bitter laugh. "Of course, the cancer doctor. Have you come to save me?" "No," she replied directly. "I came because you collapsed, and someone has to care what happens next. That is my responsibility here." He didn't respond. His coat now hung from one arm, as if he couldn't decide whether to put it on or throw it across the room. Eliana walked to the chair across from the hospital bed and quietly sat down. She didn't open the chart, nor did she ask any questions, simply observing him. Jasper narrowed his eyes, challenging her. "This is where you tell me about the miracle drug, right? The study that gives me 6 extra months of life." She shook her head. "No." He pressed, "Then what do you want to just be present?" "Just that," she affirmed softly. Silence stretched between them. Eliana's gaze didn't waver. She didn't look at the IV stand, the monitor, or the blood dotting the sheet where he'd torn the line out. She looked directly at him, somehow not as a billionaire, a diagnosis, or a file on her tablet. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. "Maybe there's nothing more to be done. But if you're wrong," she continued, "if there's even the smallest chance you shouldn't be alone when that moment comes, no one should face such a time by themselves." Jasper clenched his jaw, his voice rough and final when it came. "I've lived enough," he stated, "and I don't owe anyone another minute." She didn't argue. Instead, she stood, reached into her coat pocket, and pulled out a plain, unassuming business card, Dr. Eliana Hale Oncology. She placed it gently on the tray table beside the bed. "I won't follow you," she said, turning toward the door. "But if one day you stop running, I'll still be here." The door closed behind her with a soft click. Jasper stood frozen, not because of pain or fear, but because for the first time in a long time, someone had not tried to fix him. She had simply chosen to stay offering presence rather than a solution. The Whitmore estate rose like a fortress at the edge of the hills, a formidable structure of stone and steel, cold and defiant against the soft grays of the early afternoon. It was clearly the kind of home built to keep the world out, not to welcome it in. Eliana Hale adjusted her scarf as she stepped from the town car, her shoes clicking softly against the winding slate path where the air smelled of pine and rain-soaked stone. A butler opened the door before she could knock, greeting her with, "Dr. Hale, Mr. Whitmore is expecting you." She was led through a corridor that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. There was no music, no portraits, and no visible sign of life, only rows of books and the faint ticking of an unseen clock. The living room was vast and cavernous. A single grand piano stood untouched in the corner, its lid slightly open, revealing ivory keys dusted with time. On its stand sat a piece of sheet music unfinished. Its final lines faded abruptly, the ink slightly smudged. It was like a life that had once filled the room and then disappeared mid-note. Eliana stood for a moment looking at it. "Moonlight Sonata," came a deep, distant voice from behind her. She turned to see Jasper standing in the doorway wrapped in a charcoal robe over casual clothes. His frame was thinner than she remembered and his expression remained impassive. "My wife was playing it the night before her surgery," he said. "She never finished." Eliana didn't respond immediately. "Sit if you want," he gestured to the couch. "I won't keep you long." She sat quietly as he moved toward a side table and poured tea, 1 cup for her, 1 for himself, with no sugar or cream, just hot water and steam curling into the air between them. "This meeting," he said, placing the cup in front of her, "is a legal formality. My attorney requires a specialist's second opinion before finalizing my advanced directive." He slid a manila envelope across the coffee table. Inside were medical scans, charts, and a signed declaration refusing further treatment. "I'm not here to change your mind," Eliana said softly. He looked at her surprised. "No lecture?" he asked. No emotional plea from the bright young doctor. She smiled faintly, but the warmth didn't reach her eyes. "Do you know what it's like to lose someone right in front of you?" she asked, "and not be able to do anything about it?" Jasper said nothing. "My father died during my first night on call," she continued, her voice low. "He collapsed at home from a heart attack. I was at the closest ER within 10 miles and they brought him in under a name I didn't recognize. By the time I realized who he was..." She stopped, her gaze distant. I froze. I hesitated. And he was gone. A profound silence stretched across the room, not a silence of indifference, but one of something understood, though not spoken aloud. Eliana didn't apologize for the story or offer it as a bargaining chip. She simply let it hang in the space between them. Jasper leaned back, his hand resting loosely on the arm of the chair. His eyes, once guarded, now flickered with something more human, perhaps pain or memory. He broke the silence. "You stayed that night at the hospital." "I did," she replied. "Why?" "Because I saw someone who wasn't afraid of dying," she explained, "but I wondered if he was afraid of being alone when it happened." Jasper looked away, and neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, he reached for the pen beside the envelope and signed the final page without flourish. He then closed the folder and handed it to her. "This doesn't mean I'm giving up," he said, his voice dry. "It means I'm choosing not to fight a war I never believed in." Eliana stood, taking the file with her. She didn't argue or protest. As she walked to the door, she turned back and looked once more at the abandoned piano, at the music left unfinished. "Thank you for the tea," she said. He nodded once, a subtle acknowledgement. When she was gone, Jasper remained still. The tea beside him had gone cold, but he found himself staring at the music again, perhaps hearing the echo of a note he had tried hard to forget. A subtle shift had occurred within him, a stirring of something long dormant. The next day the front gate was unlocked. That alone was enough to make Eliana pause. She stood outside for a moment, holding a slim brown envelope under her coat, the winter wind tugging at her hair. She had no appointment, no invitation, and yet something compelled her to return. The butler opened the door wordlessly and stepped aside. Eliana walked in, brushing snow from her coat. Jasper was in the same chair as yesterday, a different row, but wearing the same cool, tired, distant expression. He looked up from the book in his lap, clearly surprised by her presence. "I did not call for another consult," he said flatly. "This is not a consult," Eliana replied, holding up the envelope. "It is a gift." She placed the envelope on the side table, nodded once, and turned to leave. Jasper stared at it for a while before opening it, intrigued. Inside was a single CD. Handwritten in elegant script across its white surface were 4 words, Claire's favorite for Jasper. That night, he sat alone in the same room, the fire crackling low, and placed the disc into the old stereo system. The opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune filled the room, soft and haunting. He did not cry, nor did he speak, but he listened intently. The next day she came again, this time with a small thermos and 2 ceramic cups of freshly brewed mint tea. There was no lecture, no charts. She poured 2 cups, placed one beside him, and sat quietly across the room. They did not speak, but Jasper stared at the cup for a long time before finally taking a sip. It was just tea, yet its warmth made his fingers stop trembling. On the 3rd day, Eliana brought a single-folded article, a medical journal piece from a French research lab detailing experimental data on immune response stimulation in late-stage patients. She did not say, "You should try this." She simply laid it on the coffee table beside the tea and remarked, "I found this interesting." Jasper barely glanced at it, but later when she left, he read every word. Days soon turned into a quiet pattern. Eliana returned each afternoon with something new, sometimes a short story, sometimes a faded photograph of a medical team in the Andes, sometimes a silly anecdote about her residency. None of these offerings demanded trust. They only offered it freely and without expectation. She never stayed long, nor did she ever ask questions about his condition. But she came consistently, and each time he left the gate unlocked a silent invitation for her return. A fragile connection was forming between the two of them, unspoken, yet undeniable. One night, long after she had gone, Jasper returned to the CD. He pressed play again, and the room filled with soft violins and the ache of memory. He sat in the dark, one hand resting lightly on the arm of the chair where Claire used to sit. When the track ended, he reached for his phone. He typed a message, paused, then sent it. "If you come tomorrow, bring more mint tea." Eliana read it at her kitchen counter, a tired smile blooming across her face. She said nothing to herself, only set her kettle out in preparation for the next day, a quiet acceptance. Meanwhile, Jasper upstairs in his room closed his eyes. It had been months since anyone came into his life without asking him to give something back. Months since he had let anyone close. Eliana Hale had not asked for anything. She had simply shown up, and for the first time in years, Jasper left the music playing as he fell asleep. Rain pressed against the windows like a quiet, steady breath. The storm outside had settled into a rhythm persistent, but not loud, the kind that filled empty spaces without asking permission. Eliana sat in the leather chair across from Jasper, her hands wrapped around a cup of mint tea. She did not speak for a long time, nor did he. He hadn't shaved that day, and his hair was damp at the edges from a walk in the garden. He looked in some subtle way more like a person than a monument. "Can I ask you something?" Eliana said, her voice quiet. Jasper glanced at her but said nothing. "Are you afraid of dying?" she asked directly. "Or are you afraid of surviving and having no one to survive with?" For a moment, the only sound was the rain and the faint clink of ceramic as he set his cup down. "That is not a medical question," he said finally. "No," she replied. "It is a human one." Jasper leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the fire that burned low in the hearth. His voice, when it came, was softer than she had ever heard it. "She was the first person who didn't laugh when I said I wanted to build something that could change the world." Eliana knew he meant his wife, and she did not interrupt. "I met her in college. She worked at the library circulation desk, and I used to make up excuses to check out the same book 3 times. A pause hung in the air, thick with unspoken memories. She was there, he continued, before the first investors, before the first patent, before the first lawsuit, before the IPO. She believed in the version of me that did not exist yet, a version only she seemed to see in me. Jasper's gaze dropped to his hands. He turned his wedding ring slowly on his finger, a simple gold band he had never taken off. We were married 9 years. She wanted children. We tried, but then she got sick. It was supposed to be a minor routine surgery, he recounted. They said it was post-op complications, nothing that should have happened. Eliana set her tea down, the air between them growing heavy. They missed something on her chart, Jasper continued, a reaction to a common sedative. She coded during the recovery. They revived her. Then she coded again and again until they didn't. His voice did not break, but his eyes no longer held their usual steel. I did not get to say goodbye. 1 minute she was squeezing my hand, and the next. He stopped, his voice trailing off. She died in a room full of people who told me to trust the process. The words hung heavy and full of anguish in the quiet space between them, a testament to his profound loss. Another long silence followed. I filed a case, he said. I hired the best legal team, fought for 18 months. Hospital administration pushed it back with technicalities and settlements. By the time the verdict came through, all I had was an apology letter and a waiver form. That was the last time I stepped into a clinic, Jasper added, until I collapsed. Eliana leaned forward slightly, speaking gently. You did not stop believing in medicine, Jasper. You stopped believing in the people who failed her. He did not deny it. I spent my life building systems, he said, networks, algorithms, but I could not stop the one glitch that mattered most, the one that broke everything. Eliana said nothing. She just moved her chair an inch closer. Not enough to make a statement, just enough to make space between them. Jasper looked at her, then back at the fire. I am not afraid to die, he stated. I am afraid of living and never feeling safe again. And that Eliana realized was the truth no chart could ever capture. He was not giving up because he wanted to die. He was retreating, protecting the one thing he had left, his ability to choose the terms of his end. They sat together as the rain kept falling outside. Outside the world was gray and slick with stormlight, but inside something unspoken shifted between them. It wasn't enough to call it hope, but it was enough to call it not the end, a quiet acknowledgement of a possibility. The cough came in the middle of a conversation. Jasper had been reciting a passage from an old book, something his wife once underlined in blue ink, when his breath caught halfway through a sentence. He turned his head, reached for a tissue, and coughed. The red stain bloomed across the white linen like a small, quiet alarm. Eliana froze. Jasper, she said gently, has this happened before? He wiped his mouth, avoiding her eyes. Once or twice. It is nothing. It is not nothing, she replied firmly. I said no doctors, no hospitals, no more tests, he reminded her, his tone hardening. Eliana's voice tightened. You are already under my care, whether you like it or not, Jasper. He folded the tissue and set it aside. I am not changing my mind, Eliana. I have my reasons, and they are deep-seated. She did not press him further, understanding the futility. She only nodded once and left earlier than usual that day, but she could not sleep that night. The image of the blood haunted her, its color, the timing, the way his hand had trembled for a fraction of a second. She had seen it before, the telltale sign of an advanced condition. In late-stage cases, a window sometimes opened, a narrow, brutal sliver of time when an experimental immunotherapy could make a difference. But only if caught early, and only if acted upon swiftly, with audacious conviction. The next morning, Eliana arrived at Jasper's estate with her usual bag. Inside, she had brought mint tea, a newspaper article, and the smallest of plans. As Jasper poured the water and turned to check the kettle, she quietly picked up the porcelain teacup he had used the day before, Dried blood still lingered on the rim enough for a panel test. That evening, under a different name, she submitted the sample to the research wing of a specialized oncology clinic. Her stomach churned with anxiety for days afterward, the weight of her actions heavy on her conscience. When the results arrived, Eliana locked herself in her office to read them, her heart pounding. The data was unmistakable. Jasper's condition qualified for a trial. It was not a guarantee, but it was a window, a slim fighting chance at life if they moved quickly. However, she had committed a serious breach of protocol, putting everything at risk. If anyone found out, she could lose everything. That "if" arrived sooner than expected. 2 weeks later, Eliana was called into the hospital boardroom for an unscheduled disciplinary review. Someone had flagged her anonymous lab request, cross-checked timestamps, patient location, and sample anomalies, all pointing to her. The air in the conference room was cold and stiff. An older physician with wire-rimmed glasses stared her down from across the table. "Dr. Hale, do you deny that you submitted a patient's sample under a false name without consent in violation of federal and institutional protocols?" Eliana did not speak. Her hands lying folded on the table, her throat tight. The chairwoman continued, "You understand the gravity of this situation. This will lead to immediate suspension pending further investigation and possible revocation of your license." "I did what I believed was right," she finally said, her voice quiet but firm. "I am not sorry." "Then you may be the only one who feels that way," a board member muttered, the disapproval clear in his tone. The door opened and Jasper walked in. He looked like a ghost, but one made of intention, not absence. His posture was tall, his expression calm and controlled. He wore a dark coat, rain-dappled at the collar, and the room froze at his unexpected presence. "I asked her to come," he said, his voice ringing through the silence. "I asked her not to treat me, not to interfere, not to hope. She respected that until I coughed up blood and told her to pretend it was nothing." A brief, heavy pause followed as the board members exchanged stunned glances. "You want to charge someone?" he asked, stepping closer. "Charge me." The chairwoman began, "Mr. Whitmore, you are not a licensed medical professional. You cannot waive institutional law." Jasper cut her off, his gaze, unwavering, his resolve absolute. "Then call it trespassing," he said. "Call it emotional blackmail. But do not accuse her of trying to save someone who wanted to die only because he was too afraid to live again." He turned toward Eliana, his voice gentle but unwavering. "You did not abandon me," he told her. "Even when I begged you to, even when I made it harder than anyone should have to bear. You simply stayed." Eliana stared at him, blinking hard, her eyes welling with a mix of shock and gratitude. "If saving me was wrong," Jasper said, facing the board again, "then let me be the one to carry the consequence. But let her keep her work. Let her keep the right to try to hope to heal others." A silence fell over the room. It was not approval, but it was not rejection either, simply a stunned quiet. Later, as they stood outside beneath a gray sky, Eliana looked at him. "You could have let me take the fall," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I would have," he replied, his gaze steady, "before I met you and learned what it meant to truly live again." The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors and the occasional whisper of IV drips. Jasper now sat upright in bed, thinner than he had been just 2 weeks earlier. The hollows beneath his eyes had deepened his frame, leaner, stripped of the armor success had once wrapped around him. But his eyes, they were different now. Sharper, brighter, not with certainty but with something close to it, a quiet willingness to live a flicker of hope he hadn't known existed. He glanced at the small table beside him where Eliana had left a folded copy of the treatment schedule. The immunotherapy trial would be aggressive, bringing with it pain, nausea, disorientation, and fatigue. Even then, there were no promises of success, no guarantees of a cure. Jasper signed the consent form anyway, not because he believed he would survive, but because for the first time in years, someone had believed in him. Not as a CEO, not as a patient, but as a man who might still have something left to live for a life worth fighting for after all. The first round of treatment hit him like a wave. By day 3, he was unable to stand without assistance. His appetite vanished, and night sweats left him gasping, lost between waking and sleep. Throughout it all, Eliana was always there, a constant, comforting presence. She wasn't just his oncologist, though she performed that role with unwavering precision, adjusting his IV herself and memorizing every shift in his vitals. More than that, she simply stayed offering genuine companionship. She would sit at the edge of his bed reading aloud from old medical journals she once loved or playing recordings of piano pieces Jasper's wife had adored. Sometimes she said nothing at all, merely staying by his side in quiet companionship, a silent anchor. One night, long after visiting hours ended, Jasper opened his eyes and found her sitting in the corner wrapped in a cardigan, legs curled beneath her. "You should go home," he murmured. She shook her head gently. "You are not my responsibility anymore," he added softly, trying to push her away. Eliana looked at him, her voice gentle. "You were never just my responsibility, Jasper." He turned his head to the side, then said, "You were afraid." She blinked, asking, "Of what?" "Of me dying," he replied, his voice barely a whisper. "Like your father." The room went still, and Eliana's breath caught. Jasper had read between lines she had never written, and yet he was right. She stood, walked slowly to his bedside, and sat. "Yes," she whispered, her eyes meeting his, "but I stayed anyway because I realized something profound." "What?" he asked, curiosity stirring within him. "That sometimes the fear of pain is a shadow of love," she said, her voice tender. "And I would rather feel both than nothing at all." The profound honesty hung in the air, a shared vulnerability. Jasper did not respond, but his hand shifted slightly on the blanket, brushing gently against hers, a silent acknowledgement of her words. The next morning, Eliana found a sealed envelope on her desk. Inside was a revised will, signed and witnessed. It stipulated that if Jasper did not survive the treatment, his entire estate would be transferred to a medical research institute of her choosing. There was one condition: it must bear the name of his late wife, Lydia Whitmore. The attached letter was shorthand written in his distinct script. "I spent years hating what I could not understand. You helped me see that healing is not the same as forgetting. If I die," the letter concluded, "let it be in service of something better than silence, something that truly makes a difference." Eliana folded the letter slowly, tears pricking the edge of her vision, a testament to the man he had become. That night she sat beside Jasper again. His face was pale, his body weak, but when he turned his head toward her, there was no resignation in his eyes, only a quiet, resolute light, a testament to a rekindled spirit and a newfound purpose. The ballroom of the Global Oncology Summit gleamed with soft golden light, casting warm reflections across marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Laughter murmured low among elegantly dressed guests. Researchers, oncologists, donors, and policymakers gathered from around the world. Camera flashes punctuated the hush as live feeds streamed across monitors. Screens flickered with innovations, honors, and endowment figures. The air was full of brilliance, ambition, and the quiet weight of responsibility. And yet the room did not truly come alive until Jasper Whitmore stepped onto the stage, commanding immediate attention from everyone present. A slight intake of breath could be heard across the audience. Gone was the youthful titan of the tech world, known for his black suits and sharper tongue. What emerged was a man altered not just by illness, but by something deeper, a profound inner transformation that shone in his eyes. His once dark hair had returned in streaks of dignified silver. His frame was lean, illness still echoing in the angles of his jaw and the looseness of his suit. Yet his spine was straight, his steps were sure, and when he reached the podium, his eyes moved immediately without hesitation toward the audience, and specifically toward her. Eliana Hale sat in the third row wearing a navy dress and a quiet expression. Her hair was pinned simply, her hands folded tightly in her lap. But her heart was already on that stage, waiting for what she both knew and did not know was coming, a culmination of their shared journey. The moderator stepped back, offering Jasper the spotlight. He adjusted the microphone, then looked down briefly, collecting himself, perhaps honoring the gravity of what this moment meant. Then he looked up, his gaze steady, and began his address. "I never thought I would be here," he said, his voice calm but certain. "Not on this stage, not in this room, not alive." A ripple passed through the room. Uncertainty mixed with awe at his words, acknowledging the miracle of his presence. "I am not here because I fought harder than anyone else. I am not here because I deserve a second chance more than others. I am here because someone did not walk away." The room fell into stillness so profound that even the servers at the back of the ballroom stopped moving. "She never forced the issue, never lectured or pushed past the walls I'd built. She brought tea, music, silence. She brought herself. And somehow in all that quiet she made space for me to return." Jasper turned his head slightly, as if inviting the room to feel what he felt, the depth of her impact. His voice softened. "I had given up. Not dramatically, just entirely. I blamed everyone and everything but the truth that I was grieving so deeply I mistook it for clarity." He paused, letting his confession settle. No one in the audience filled the silence, listening intently. "And then Eliana Hale walked into my life," he continued, "not as a miracle but as a mirror. She never begged me to live. She simply reminded me how." The profound simplicity of his words resonated deeply with everyone present. Eliana blinked hard, holding back emotion, though her throat ached with suppressed tears. Jasper reached into his pocket and unfolded a crisp piece of paper. "Today I am announcing the creation of a permanent endowment for the Eliana Hale Institute for Integrative Oncology," he declared. "This initiative will support research in patient-centered care, early detection, and post-treatment emotional recovery. We will also fund community programs that put compassion back into the clinical model, ensuring a holistic approach." He held up the document, his hand steady and resolute. "This is not just an announcement," he continued. "It is my apology to the field of medicine and my promise to every patient who ever felt unseen. And most of all, it is for the person who saw me before I saw myself." Applause rose like a wave, then a second wave stronger, swelling into a standing ovation. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment. But when Eliana rose from her seat and quietly walked toward the stage, the crowd hushed again, sensing something intimate unfolding before them. Her heels tapped softly against the floor, deliberate and unhurried. She reached Jasper, and he turned to face her. She said nothing. She took no microphone. Instead, she simply reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers gently. There was no performance, no kiss, no ring, just one gesture, honest, human, and whole. Two people standing together in the light, after so much darkness, their connection palpable and profound. And in that silence, Jasper smiled, not for the cameras, but solely for her, a genuine smile of peace. The house no longer echoed with emptiness. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen window as Eliana poured hot water into a teapot, mint and chamomile, the blend Jasper had memorized from their earliest days. Outside, a small wind chime sang softly, its melody gentle like the morning. A year had passed since the night Jasper stood on stage and gave away the empire he once built on silence. Now, that empire hummed with life. The Eliana Hale Institute had already provided treatment for dozens of patients, many of them survivors who once believed they were out of time. The research wing had received its second grant, thriving under its new direction. Eliana spent her days between patient consultations, mentoring young physicians, and taking quiet breaks with a man who no longer needed to hide from the world, fully embracing life. Jasper sat at the garden table under the lemon tree, stirring sugar into her cup. Before she arrived, a ritual he performed each morning, even when she beat him to it. He was thinner than the man who once ran tech empires, his hair now mostly silver, but his eyes were brighter, kinder. He smiled more now, sometimes for no reason at all. Eliana walked out and sat across from him, accepting the cup with a nod. "You know," she teased gently, "one day I am going to switch to coffee just to test you, Jasper." "I will adapt," he replied deadpan, then added, "eventually." That afternoon, Eliana was scheduled to speak at a medical school. She stood in front of a room full of students, their white coats crisp, their eyes bright with ambition. "I did not cure cancer," she told them honestly. "I found someone who no longer wanted to live and stayed until he changed his mind." No applause followed, only a pause, then a wave of quiet understanding that settled over the room. The next morning, as the sunlight painted gold across the backyard, Jasper brought her tea, the same blend, the same cup. But this time, when she lifted the lid, there was a ring nestled inside. It was simple silver, nothing flashy, just a quiet promise of a future together, a symbol of their enduring love. Eliana did not cry. She did not need a question to be asked. She set the cup down, leaned across the table, and kissed him deeply, sealing their unspoken commitment. They married without ceremony, no press, no elaborate vows under chandeliers. It was just two signatures, two witnesses, and a 3-year-old girl in a blue dress who kept trying to draw on the marriage certificate. Her name was Hope, a beautiful testament to their new beginning. Hope had been abandoned after completing her final round of leukemia treatment. They met her during a hospital visit, and from that day on, she never left their hearts, becoming an integral part of their family. Eliana and Jasper brought her home on a Thursday, welcoming her into their lives. She clung to Eliana's hair when she first slept in her own bed. Jasper learned how to braid her wild curls, and in the garden life unfolded again, richer and more vibrant than before, a tapestry of joy and shared moments. Eliana read aloud from a book under the soft sun, her glasses sliding down her nose. Jasper sat beside her, trying to fix a crooked hair clip on Hope's wild curls, while the little girl giggled, tipping her cup and splashing tea down her little pink dress. Hope laughed louder, and they all laughed with her. Jasper looked at Eliana, his eyes full of everything he had never planned for, but now could not imagine losing. Then he whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "You were never my last patient, Eliana. You were my first reason to want more time." Sometimes the most powerful healing does not come from medicine, but from someone who simply chooses to stay. Jasper Whitmore was ready to die, not because his body failed, but because his heart had stopped believing in life. Eliana Hale simply stayed long enough for him to remember how to want more time to embrace a future he once rejected. This was not merely a story about survival, it was a story about choosing love even when it hurts, and choosing life even when it scares you. If this story has touched your heart and you're drawn to quiet bravery, emotional healing, and love that grows in the unlikeliest places, then you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more tales that remind us that even in our darkest hours, one person's kindness can light the way back. Thank you for watching and for feeling with us, embracing these narratives of human connection and profound transformation.